Hey, it's Rob, and welcome to Axel's Garage. Okay, the Big Dummy's K5 Blazer or V10 Blazer, however you want to call it. It's a square body. It's an 89, throttle body injected, and he's got a continually crank no start issue. And I'm gonna have to give you, just humor me for 2 minutes of me yapping the backstory on it. So we had a crank no start. We determined was the fuel pump. When we pulled everything apart, we saw that the fuel pump ground side was faulty, and that caused the fuel pump to go bad. And we had a melted ground wire where it goes into the inside the pump, where it goes into the connection. It was all melted because the ground side was not making good contact at the chassis rail. So we ran a new ground in a good spot on the chassis, bolted it in, put a new fuel pump in, and the thing ran like a top without a hitch. During that whole troubleshooting phase, we did put a new fuel pump relay in it as well. We did not replace the fuel filter, which we probably should have. When you replace the pump, always a good idea to replace the filter. We didn't do that, but he drove it for about a month or two without a problem after the fuel pump was put in. And then he had some weird crank no start issues that seemed to come and go, and there was no rhyme or reason to it. So long story short, the Big Dummy moved down to Virginia, and his truck stood up here with me, and I decided to try to drive it, but it was the heat of the summer, and it seems it would start right up, but then it would die when it got hot, when the engine got to normal operating temperature. And some vague troubleshooting led us in the direction of a bad ignition control module. They usually fail when they're hot. So we replaced the ignition control module. The thing fired right back up. The Big Dummy came home, and he was home for a week or two, and he was driving it around without a hitch, no problem at all. Started, ran, everything was cool. Parked it, he went back to Virginia, and then about 2 weeks later I said, you know what, I want to take it for a spin, and I'm going to use it for here or there, going back and forth to work maybe. And started it up, and it would stall relatively quickly. Started up, it would run for a while, and then stall. We never really got to that hot part, like the ignition control module was failing. And then when I was trying to troubleshoot it, I went out to it, and it would just not do anything. It would crank, but I couldn't get it to grab at all, and that's where we're at right now. So we had it parked across the street, and they were paving the road, and it was weeks. I hadn't had a chance to look at it. I was working on some other projects, but we knew where it was sitting, that it would crank and crank really good until we killed the battery pretty much, but would not start. So we just hooked up a tow strap to it and towed it over to the other side of the house, and they repaved the roads. And then when we came to tow it back over here so that I could easily work on it in proximity to my garage, as my wife has told me, and I knew the battery was really weak because we had tried cranking on it sometime earlier, as she was towing me around the street, I hit the key to see if it would start, and the thing started right up. Didn't say running, but did start right up several times, which was kind of odd, especially on a real weak battery. So that just made my mind think a little bit that could I have a ground problem, that as the truck moves and as we pulled it and as we moved it, I'm getting ground, I'm not getting ground. Do I have a bad chassis ground or engine ground or body ground? It just made me think that as we moved the truck and it started, and when the truck sat, it didn't start. So, and it always cranked pretty much the same way. Just made me think. So now it's been sitting here a couple weeks. I've had the battery on a trickle charger, so the battery's fully charged up. And what I want to do is I want to just try to troubleshoot this thing. If it had a carburetor, it would be so much easier because I could rule out a lot of stuff right off the bat. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this spark tester, I'm going to put it in line with one of the plugs, and hopefully we can determine as it cranks, and hopefully it doesn't start. I'm hoping it doesn't start, because if it starts, then now more troubleshooting is tough when it's actually working. So I'm going to put this in line, I'm going to crank it, and I'm going to get some starting fluid out, and I'm going to see if I can get it started. Do I have spark? Do I have fuel? Let's try to narrow it down from there and see what happens. So here I have my air cleaner removed, even the ring around the fuel injector is removed so we could possibly see some injector flow, and I got my spark tester right above the distributor cap there. hooked into one of the spark plug wires. So hopefully we can figure out what is going on here. So now I'm going to give it a crank and let's see what happens. So I'm going to have to look back on this tape right now and see if I had spark or anything coming out of the injectors. I did hear the pump come on and prime when I turn the key on. It gives that 2-second prime. So the pump did prime, but I don't know what it was doing when it was cranking because I couldn't see it because I'm by myself. So we look back on the video and I'll get back with you in a second. Alright, so to be completely honest, I couldn't see nothing. The screen on the camera is way too small for me to determine whether or not the spark thing was sparking unless I download it to the computer, so that didn't help much. So let me put a little starting fluid in and let's give it a crank and see if it starts on starting fluid. Alright, started on starting fluid. So I'm thinking fuel is my problem. Where can we go from there? Well, I could take out one of my jumpers. Alright, and I got a little jumper that I made up that you've seen me use in previous videos. And this jumper, it's got 2 spade terminals on the end. And in theory, I should be able to grab this lead that is hanging off of my fuel pump relay, and that should force my fuel pump on. I can hear the fuel pump running. Got my vice grips clamped on my power lead to my jumper, and I can hear the fuel pump running. So with the fuel pump bypass, now I can see I clearly have a good spark on my spark tester. And I got fuel coming out of my fuel injectors. And it's running. Now what I can do is pull the fuse from my jumper wire, and if it shuts down, you know that fuel pump is not running. We are only feeding the fuel pump with positive. We didn't do anything to the ground circuit. So if I come over here to my jumper, on my fuse in my jumper, and I pull it out, now it's running on its own. I'm not connected at all. So was that prime circuit bad? Because now it's running on the oil pressure switch bypass is how it's getting its power. I don't believe this any longer after it starts gets power via the fuel pump relay. And the only other way to test that is by unplugging the relay while it's running. Well, that was a lot of electronic noise. Alright, so the relay does run the vehicle, but it's wired through the oil pressure switch, which is disconnected, which should give and it's been disconnected even when it ran well. So that should give a fictitiously high reading when it's disconnected to the computer, so it thinks that there is oil pressure and doesn't cut the fuel. I believe the oil pressure switch is only cuts the fuel when it sees low oil pressure. Let's see if it starts again without the jumper connected. Alright, so that time I shut it off with the key and we didn't get all those weird electrical noises. I don't know now. I am miffed. So, you saw it the same as I saw it. It would not start. It was getting spark, wasn't getting fuel. I jumped the fuel pump relay and it started and ran, disconnected the fuel pump relay, and it stalled. So the relay has to be good the entire time for it to run. And then it started again. So the only other variable that we haven't, really thought about it is, could that oil pressure switch be playing a role in this? I don't see how, because the oil pressure switch has been bad for a long time, even when it was running good. And when I disconnected the wire from it, it still ran good. There's definitely a problem, and I can't pinpoint the problem, and that's what's making it real aggravating, is that I can't pinpoint where the problem is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull that oil pressure switch out. I do have a new one. And let's plug in an oil pressure switch. See what happens. I would have bet the farmer had a bad ground. So here's the old oil pressure switch, sending switch. The body should be a lot longer. This one completely fell apart, and I had this one laying back there like that. Wasn't leaking or anything, but it wasn't hooked up, which was causing the oil pressure gauge to read high, but the car was working. And that's my concern, is that if it's something like that, if that was the problem, why was it working sometimes and wasn't working other times? I don't know. So what I'm going to do now is start it up. Let's see if it works. It's been not running for an hour. Let's see if it'll prime itself without doing that jumper like we did the last time. I don't know.